Okay, so here was the offer.
I will give $10,000 to the PLO in your name if you can find a historical fact in my book that you can prove to be false. I issue that challenge. I issue it to you. I issue it to the Palestinian Authority. I issue it to Noam Chomsky. I issue it to Edward Said. Every word in my book is accurate, and you can't just simply say it's false without documenting it. Tell me one thing in the book now that is false.
And that was Professor Alan Dershowitz debating the Institute for Public Accuracy's Sam Husseini on Scarborough Country. Well, the challenge has been put out there if anyone can find historical error in Alan Dershowitz's new book, The Case for Israel. And we're continuing our debate today between Professor Dershowitz, who is a law professor at Harvard Law School, and Norman Finkelstein, who teaches at DePaul University in Chicago and author of several books, including Image and Reality of the Israel-Palestine Conflict and the Holocaust Industry, Reflections on the Exploitation of Jewish Suffering. Professor Dershowitz, on the second day, thanks for being with us and continuing this debate.
Well, let's summarize where we are now. Thus far, what Mr. Finkelstein has said is he's claimed that I correctly quoted Mark Twain and correctly quoted a great many other sources that also appear in the Peters book and Myth and Fact and many other books. Yes, that's absolutely correct. Second, he has found a possible typographical error in numbers that would, if it was an error, hurt my cause considerably. Now, whenever you argue that somebody makes an error, you always argue, and the errors always help your cause. When somebody makes an error that hurts his cause, when the true figures would have been 200,000 or 300,000, and if I had said 2 or 3 million, that would be a very serious charge. But reducing it by 100-fold, obviously, is either a typographical error which hurts my cause, or, and we're going to check the book, I was referring to a narrower time period. Third and finally, Mr. Finkelstein points out disagreements between my book, where I document what I say about Jenin, and what B'Tselem and Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have said. Yes, we have a very serious disagreement here, and I urge people to read my chapter in Jenin, because I take the position that Jenin was a model of urban warfare that in most other countries, in fact, there's an op-ed piece in the Times comparing what Israel did with Jenin with what other countries have done. Most countries would just drop a bomb. And Israel went in retail, lost 23 of its own soldiers, house-to-house fighting. The United States government has studied that house-to-house fighting in an effort to learn how to use implosion devices which bring down houses without damaging and hurting people. The same thing is true about torture. I stick to my very strong argument. I'm very proud of the Israeli judiciary and what it's done in trying to bring the issue of torture up to the surface, distinguishing between lethal torture, which nobody has ever accused Israel of using, and very rough interrogation techniques, which Israel is the only country in the world ever to have outlawed. And so I want to get to the last point that I really make major important point in the media, and that is, it's a central point in my book, that you hear all the time that Israel has killed as many as 2,500 Palestinians in the recent 3 years, and only about 900 Israelis have been killed. And that contrast is starkly made. And one of the major contributions I think I make in my book is to deconstruct those numbers and to point out that of the 2,500 Palestinians who have been killed, that includes the suicide bombers themselves, that includes collaborators who have been killed by other Palestinians, that includes people who have been blown up when bomb factories explode. It even includes people when Hamas has funerals and they shoot the guns up in the air, forgetting about Newton's law that the bullets will come down, the occasional person who's injured or killed there. I also point out that of the 900 Israelis who have been killed, more than 2,000 were actually kind of mortally wounded, but were saved by the incredible first efforts of Israeli emergency responders, and that as many as 10 times that number were attempted to be killed. For example, in the first 3 months of this year, there were no terrorist attacks in Israel, but Israel thwarted many such attacks. And when you do the comparisons, therefore, you have to compare, first of all, intended killings, targeted killings of civilians, with the incidental killings. Second of all, the numbers of civilians killed, many more Israeli civilians have been killed than Palestinian civilians. As my feminist colleague Phyllis Chesler, who's written a very good book called The New Anti-Semitism, has pointed out, many feminist groups have not noticed the fact that many more women have been killed, Israeli women than Palestinian women. Many more Israeli children have been killed. So it's crucially important when you look at gross figures, like the number of people killed, you don't just create one for one. When the FBI was fighting the Ku Klux Klan, we didn't expect the same number of Klan people to be killed. More terrorists are going to be killed, especially when terrorists quite deliberately hide among the civilian population, therefore telling essentially the Israelis, look, either you have to give a pass to the terrorists, don't go after them, or you have to risk killing civilians. One of the theses of my books is that every time a civilian is killed, the Palestinian movement benefits, whether it's a civilian on the Palestinian side or an Israeli civilian. And every time a civilian is killed, the Israeli side is hurt, because Israel suffers terribly when its own civilians are killed, but it also suffers terribly when it kills civilians. And as Golda Meir once said, we can perhaps forgive them for killing our children, but we can never forgive them for making us kill their children. And it's this kind of moral incompatibility between directly targeting civilians on the one hand, which is what Palestinian terrorist groups do, and what Israel and the United States does, that is trying desperately to kill the combatants, and in the course of that killing civilians, that Mr. Finkelstein completely ignores. And in his trivia of looking at trees and typos and the use of quotes that are multiple uses by many people, he fails to see the forest. And I'd like to get to the forest and talk about the morality on both sides of this issue.
Professor Norman Finkelstein.
I, too, want to get to the forest, especially when the forest is comprised of fraudulent trees, and the whole forest is a fake. Let's look at your book. You summarized the discussion so far as you cite one quote from Mark Twain, and Joan Peters cited one quote from Mark Twain. The quotes are correct, and what's the big issue?
They are correct, right?
Mr. Dershowitz, I gave you the time. Please show a little respect. Mm-hmm. In Chapter 1, footnote 10 from Joan Peters, footnote 11, footnote 12, footnote 13, footnote 14, footnote 15, footnote 16. All of the sources, you don't cite Joan Peters, even though all the quotes come right from her.
They come from
you
multiple
cite her,
sources.
no, sir.
I cite the sources. That's
right.
what you do.
No,
you cite the source directly.
We call
that's
that
what you always do.
Sir,
Professor
Mr. Dershowitz, you have to let me speak.
But that's everybody.
Mr. Dershowitz, everybody who gets expelled from a university for lifting sources, that's what they do. They get expelled.
No.
That's the question of the sources. Now, on the question
the
of,
sources are all correct,
let's go,
right?
Mr. Dershowitz, you have, Mr. Dershowitz says, no, Mr. Dershowitz, you know what,
Professor Dershowitz, I think that Norman Finkelstein is making.
I want to answer that question.
Okay.
Mr. Dershowitz, the Joan Peters book was a hoax. What would you say about a scholar or a purported scholar who wrote a book on the Holocaust and then lifted whole cloth quotes from a Holocaust denier book?
First of all,
would you call that scholarship?
Let me answer that
Would
question.
you call it
Let
scholarship?
me answer the question. You can't repeat it 6 times and stop me from answering it. The Joan Peters book was not a hoax. The Joan Peters book was a serious attempt at serious scholarship, which Norman Finkelstein has
Find me one scholar who says that.
Has built a fraudulent career on trying to expose. It got excellent reviews in the New Republic. It got excellent reviews in a number of places. Joan Peters' book is a serious piece of scholarly work whose conclusions are disputed. Now, the fact nobody has ever claimed, not even Mr. Finkelstein, that she misquotes Mark Twain or misquotes Lord this or misquotes that. So of course it's perfectly appropriate to use her. She did a lot of research, and everybody has used some of her quotes. The quotes are appropriately used. You've missed the point.
This whole debate can end in 1 minute. It's very simple. Would you say your book is as serious a piece of scholarship as Joan Peters is?
My book is very different. My book is a
Would you say it's
piece...
of equal seriousness?
Well, let me make my point. Let me answer it. My book makes the case for Israel. That is, it tries to present responses to the arguments that are being made today on college campuses. It purports to be a resource guide for open-minded students on college campuses and people around the country who can turn to it, and when they hear professors or Norman Finkelstein or Noam Chomsky make allegations that Israel is a colonialist society, that it kills more Palestinians, that they